ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ऋषि उवाच इति तासां स्वशक्तीनां सतीनामशे असमेत्यशः प्रसुप्तलोकतन्त्राणां निशम्य गतिम् ईश्वर।
Hare Krishna, please forgive me if I make any mistakes. The Rishi Maitra said, the Lord thus heard about the suspension of the progressive creative functions of the universe due to the uncombination of his potencies, such as the Mahatattva.
Text 2. कालसंज्ञां तदा देवीं बिभ्रशक्तिम् उरुक्रमः त्रयोविंशति तत्त्वानां गणं युगपद् आविशत्.
The Supreme Powerful Lord then simultaneously entered into the 23 elements with the goddess Kali, his external energy, who alone amalgamates all the different elements.
Text 3. Excuse me. सोऽनुप्रविष्टो भगवान् चेष्टारूपेण तं गणं भिन्नं संयोजयाम् आस सुप्तं कर्म प्रबोधयाम्.
Thus, when the personality of Godhead entered into the elements of his energy, all the living entities were enlivened into different activities, just as one is engaged in his work after awakening from sleep.
Text 4. प्रबुद्धकर्मा दैवेन त्रयोविंशतिको गणः प्रेरितो जनयत् स्वाभिर्मात्राभिरधिपुरुषम्.
When the 23 principal elements were set in action by the will of the Supreme, the gigantic universal form, or the Vishwarupa, body of the Lord, came into existence.
Text 5. परेण विशता स्वस्मिन् मात्रया विश्वसृग्गणः चुक्षोभान्योन्यम् आसाद्य यस्मिन् लोकाश्चराचरः.
As the Lord in his planetary portion entered into the elements of the universal creation, they transformed into the gigantic form in which all the planetary systems and all movable and immovable creations rest.
Text 6. हिरण्मय सपुरुषः सहस्रपरिवत्सरान् आण्डकोशा उवासाप्सु सर्वसत्त्वोपब्रह्मितः.
The gigantic Virat Purusha, known as Hiranmaya, lived for 1,000 celestial years on the water of the universe, and all the living entities lay with him.
Text 7. स वै विश्वस्रजं गर्भो देवकर्मात्मशक्तिमान् विबभाजात्मनात्मानम् एकदा दशदा त्रिधा.
The total energy of the Mahatattva in the form of the gigantic Virat Rupa divided himself by himself into the consciousness of the living entities, the life of activity and self-identification, which are subdivided into 1, 10, and 3 respectively.
Text 8. एष ह्यशेषसत्त्वानाम् आत्मा शः परमात्मनः आद्योऽवतारो यत्रासो भूतग्रामो विभव्यते.
The gigantic universal form of the Supreme Lord is the first incarnation and planetary portion of the Supersoul. He is the self of an unlimited number of living entities, and in him rests the aggregate creation, which thus flourishes.
Text 9. साध्यात्मन् महसद्धिदेवश्च साधिभूत इति त्रिधा विराट् प्राणो दशविध एकदा हृदयेन च.
The gigantic universal form is represented by 3, 10, and 1 in the sense that he is the body and the mind and the senses. He is the dynamic force for all movement by 10 kinds of life energy, and he is the one heart where life energy is generated.
Text 10. स्मरण विश्वसृजामीशो विज्ञापितम् अदोक्षजः विराजम् अतपत्स्वेन तेजसैषां विवृताये.
The Supreme Lord is the super soul of all the demigods, entrusted with the task of constructing the cosmic manifestation. Being thus prayed to by the demigods, he thought to himself and thus manifested the gigantic form for their understanding.
Text 11. अथ तस्याभितप्तस्य कतिधायात्मनानिह निराभिद्यन्त देवानां तानि मे गदत शृणु.
Maitra said, "You may now hear from me how the Super Lord separated himself into the diverse forms of the demigods after the manifestation of the gigantic universal form."
Text 12. तस्याग्नेराश्यं निर्भिन्नं लोकपालो विशत्पदं वाचा स्वांशेन वक्तव्यं यया सो प्रतिपाद्यते.
Agni or heat separated from his mouth, and all the directors of material affairs entered into it in their respective positions. By that energy, the living entity expresses himself in words.
Text 13. निर्भिन्नं तालो वरुणो लोकपालो विशद्धरेः जिह्वयां शेन चरसं यया सो प्रतिपद्यते.
When the palette of gigantic form was separately manifested, Varuna, the director of water in the planetary systems, entered therein, and thus the living entity has the facility to taste everything with his tongue.
Text 14. निर्भिन्ने अश्विनो नासे विष्णुराविशतां पदं घ्राणेनांशेन गन्धस्य प्रतिपतिर्यतो भवेत्.
When the Lord's two nostrils separately manifested themselves, the dual Asvini Kumaras entered them in their proper positions, and because of this, the living entities can smell the aromas of everything.
Text 15. निर्भिन्ने अक्षिणी त्वस्ता लोकपालो विशद्विभुः चक्षुषां शेन रूपाणां प्रतिपतिर्यतो भवेत्.
Thereafter, the two eyes of the gigantic form of the Lord were separately manifested. The sun, the director of light, entered them with the partial representation of eyesight, and thus the living entities can have vision of forms.
16. निर्भिन्ननि अस्य चर्माणि लोकपालो नीलो विशत् प्राणिनांशेन संस्पर्शं येन शो प्रतिपद्यते.
When there was a manifestation of skin separated from the gigantic form, Anila, the deity directing the wind, entered with partial touch, and thus the living entities can realize tactile knowledge.
Text 17. कर्णावश्य विनिर्भिन्नो धिष्ण्यं स्वं विविशुर्दिशः श्रोत्रेणांशेन शब्दस्य सिद्धिं येन प्रपद्यते.
When the ears of the gigantic form become manifested, all the controlling deities of the direction enter into them with the hearing principles, by which all the living entities hear and take advantage of sound.
Text 18. त्वचा विनिर्भिन्नां विविशुर्धिष्ण्यमोषधिः अंशेन रोमभिकण्डुं यैराशो प्रतिपद्यते.
When there was a separate manifestation of skin, the controlling deities of sensation and their different parts enter into it, and thus the living entities feel itching and happiness due to touch.
Text 19. नेद्रं तस्य विनिर्भिन्नं स्वधिष्ण्यं क उपाविशत् रेतशांशेन येनासाव आनन्दं प्रतिपद्यते.
When the genitals of the gigantic form separately became manifest, then Prajapati, the original living creature, entered into them with his partial semen, and thus the living entities can enjoy sex pleasure.
Text 20. गुडं पुंसो विनिर्भिन्नं excuse me, मित्रो लोकेश आविशत् पायुनांशेन येनासो विसर्गं प्रतिपद्यते.
The evacuating channel separately became manifest, and the director named Mitra entered into it with partial organs of evacuation. Thus, the living entities are able to pass stool and urine.
Hare Krishna, thank you and sorry for any mistakes.
Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Sumadeva Radhika Mataji and Mitali Mataji. Nice recitation. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
Prabhuji.
Prabhuji.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Jyoti Mataji, I can share my screen, I guess.
Yes, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. So, can everyone see the 3, 6, 11 verse? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
Prabhuji. Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's start. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudire Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Neshtaki Yam Pravrajantamanupetamupetकृत्यam Dvaipayano Virahaka Aju Ava Putreti Tanmayatayo Taravo Vinedustam Sarvabhutarudayam Munimanatosmi. So we'll be chanting verses 11 to 15 from 6th chapter of the 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. So let's start. अथ तस्याभितप्तस्य कथिधा यततान्यः निरभित्यन्त देवानां तानि मे गदतः शृणु. So translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Maitreya said, You may now hear from me how the Supreme Lord separated himself into the diverse forms of the demigods after the manifestation of the gigantic universal form. Purport. The demigods are separated parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, as are all other living entities. The only difference between the demigods and the ordinary living entities is that when the living entities are rich in pious acts of devotional service to the Lord, and when their desire to lord it over material energy has vanished, they are promoted to the posts of demigods, who are entrusted by the Lord with executing the management of the universal affairs. So, तस्याग्निरांस्य निर्भिन्नं लोकपालो विशत्पदम् वाचात् स्वांशेन वक्तव्यं ययासौ प्रतिपद्यते. Translation: Agni or heat separated from his mouth, and all the directors of material affairs entered into it in their respective positions. By that energy, the living entity expresses himself in words. Vacha is addressed here. Purport: the mouth of gigantic universal form of the Lord is the source of the speaking power. The director of the fire element is the controlling deity or Adhidaiva. Abhidaiva. Adhidaiva. The speeches delivered as Adhyatma or bodily functions, and the subject matter of the speeches is material productions or Adhibhuta principle. So let's go to the next word. Next verse. 3:6:13 Nirbhinnam talu varuno lokapalo vishaddhare jibham shayenit rasam yayaso pratipadyate. Translation: when the palette of the gigantic form was separately manifested, Varuna, the director of water in the in the planetary systems, entered therein, and thus the living entity has the facility to taste everything with his tongue. 3:6:14 Nirbhinne ashvinau nase vishnora vishatam padam घ्राणेनां शेन गन्धस्य प्रतिपत्तिर् yato bhavet. When the Lord's two nostrils separately manifested themselves, the dual Ashwini Kumaras entered them in their proper positions, and because of this, the living entities can smell the aromas of everything. I think, as I understand, that's the. Give me 1 second. Yeah, this is the last verse we will be covering today. Nirbhinne akshini tvashta lokapalo vishad vibho. Translation: thereafter, the two eyes of the gigantic form of the Lord were separately manifested. The sun, the director of light, entered them with the partial representation of eyesight, and thus the living entities can have vision of forms. So let's go back to the verse number 11, and then we will start our discussion. Yeah. Okay, let's chant the invocation and then we will start. Om Ajnantimirandasya Jnananjana Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Dam Sajivam स अद्वैतं स अवधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपादान् सहगणललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च हे कृष्ण करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधु जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिका कांत राधा कांत नमोस्तुते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी ऋषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये ओम विष्णुपादाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदांत स्वामिन् इति नामिने नमस्ते सारस्वती देवी गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषा शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवास आदि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे राम 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 हरे जानुलंबितभुजौ कनकावधातौ सङ्कीर्तनैकपितरौ कमलायताक्षौ विश्वम्भरौ द्विजभरौ युगधर्मपालौ वन्दे जगत्प्रियकरौ करुणा अवतारौ यन्तः प्रविश्य मम वाचमिमां प्रसूप्तां सञ्जीवयत्य अखिलशक्तिधरस्वधाम्नश्च हस्तचरणाश्रवणात्वगादीन् प्राणान्नमो भगवते पुरुषाय तुभ्यम्. So, this is the area which is actually covered in the previous chapter. It touched upon as the creation of Mahat Tattva, the physical elements, and how demigods uh, are given certain responsibility, the creation of the posts of the demigods. That is covered in the previous chapter. If anyone would like to summarize that, I'm happy to listen. Is there anyone who can, how the sense perception is created, how Mahatattva, which is how that false ego is created from this mode of ignorance matter called Mahatattva, and then the three modes of material nature comes in the picture. So anyway, is there anyone who would like to volunteer? No? Okay. So let's go through some of the questions for the previous chapter. That may be a good starting point. So what are the modes of material nature which actually controls our senses? Or we can say the products of the modes, which modes of material nature is actually the through which the senses are created. Can anyone shed some light on that? And how the senses were, means what was the reason for the different types of senses, how it was created? Is that mode of passion and ignorance, which is the reason for the creation of the senses? Passion in false ego, and therefore philosophical speculative knowledge, and the reasons for the fruitive activities, which is the mode of passion. Am I right? No? Okay. So what previous chapter tells us is the Lord Vishnu, he glanced over the sky, mixed with what? Eternal time, the Kala Chakra, and the external energy, Bahiranga Shakti, and thus developed what? The touch sensation. And that's the sense perception, touch sensations, and the way Lord glanced over the material energy, Mahatattva, and how he impregnated the souls which were separated um, from the Antaranga Shakti, from the internal energy of the Lord, and how we came here in this material world. That's the last chapter's overview. What are all the... Hang on, I will... So, and then comes... yeah. So, Karnodaksha Vishnu, Swaamsha, his Lord Swamsha, Krishna Swamsha, his glance impregnates the jivas into material nature. Material nature is pradhana, three modes inactive, in undifferentiated, unmixed state. From that comes Mahatattva, which is, as we talked about, which has where the three modes of material nature comes in the picture. Originally, that Mahatattva on its own in the inner state is in mode of ignorance. But because of the glance, ahankara predominantly, which is in tamas, three modes of material nature come in the picture, sattva, rajatama. Jnana Shakti, Kriya Shakti, and Dravya Shakti, which is Karta, Karana, and Karya. What are all the related? Adhidaiva, Adhyatma, and Adhibhuta. Which are, how those are related? Because that's all actually these four verses, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Actually, 5 verses are actually talking about. And that's what it is covered in the process of creation in the previous chapter. So, Adhidaiva is related to mind and 10 sense devatas. Prana is senses and intelligence. And 5 tanmatras and 5 elements, which is sound, related to what? Which element? Which tattva, not the element, is related to ether. From there, intensification of that ether comes in the next element of the mode of material nature, which is touch, which is related to what? Air. The intensification of the air develops the form, and that form brings which element? That is fire. Again, this is all actually given in the Paribhasha Sutra by Sripad Madhvacharya, where he explains that initially everything is just a space. Yeah, in the Paribhasha Sutra, Sripad Madhvacharya says that originally it is just a space. So what Lord created, the ether or the Akash, Prithvi, Aap, Tej, Vayu, Akash, that's where, when the Kriya Shakti or the creative energy of the Lord, when that gets impregnated in the space, that's the first element, ether, and that's how the sound comes in the picture. And then, obviously, as the sound gets more and more intensified, that sound creates the element of touch, and then the air gets generated because of the Lord's desire to create the modes of material nature. And then form, which is led to fire, then again further intensification is taste, that's the element, and that what's the material element related to taste? Anyone? It sounds like I'm talking to myself. That's why I'm
Hare
asking.
Krishna, Prabhuji, Hare Krishna. Yes, when the kala, when it churns the air, fire generated, and its sense object is form or sight. So again, when color turns fire, water is generated, and with the sense object, taste comes. So color it turns water, and the final manifestation is earth, and its sense object is smell.
Yes, yes.
So when each element is turned, it has its own sense object plus the previous one, and earth has all five combined: sound, touch, form, sight, taste, and smell. That is from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, chapter 11, verse 40.
Yeah, Mataji, agree.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for shedding the light on this part. Now, in the fifth chapter, this is very properly explained. For example, the quality of the sky is sound, but sky, and that the Lord's glance, time, and external energy, which is Bahiranga Shakti. Let's mark that as one, what you call, the phenomena, which is inclusion of three things: Lord's glance, the Kala Chakra, and external energy, Bahiranga Shakti. When that comes together with sky, which is the first creation, then comes touch. When again that phenomena with touch, that brings air. Again, now there are two elements, air and sky, which is already created. Then comes again that phenomena, which is that Lord's glance, time, and energy. So now air, sky, and that element, let's call it as a delta, that brings form. Now keep that, let's keep the delta is the only constant, where now air and sky is created, but now form is also created. So form includes air and sky. Okay, so that fire, the fire plus air, which brings taste, because there has to be a movement, and so that again adds some delta into it, and that creates earth. So as I was trying to repeat from Sripad Madhvacharya's commentary, who is our Sampradaya Acharya, he says that the Lord's glance actually intensifies the elements, and that's how the last element of earth gets created, which is the reason for the smell. So once Srila Sachinandan Maharaj was giving a lecture, and he said something quite interesting. The first thing any living entity gets in touch with is actually the sound. As soon as the fetus generation in the body of the mother starts happening, the first sense the fetus develops is the sound, and then the last sense the fetus the baby gets is the smell. And exactly in a opposite manner, the person who is about to leave this material body here, first thing they lose is smell, and then last thing that person loses, the Jivatma loses from that material body, is the sound. And that's the reason our emphasis is on hearing the holy name, hearing the Krishna Katha, hearing the sound related to the spiritual activities, and that's what we should be connected to. This is basically the reasoning. Prabhupada says, if we want to understand the creation and what is the reason behind living entities, what do you call, the objective of life, means Athato Brahma Jitnasa, when Srila Prabhupada explains that. So this is what from the last chapter. Let's read the purport again and let's see what we can come across. And then we will try to relate this purport with what is explained in Srimad Bhagavad Gita. So the demigods are separated parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, as are all other living entities. The only difference between the demigods and the ordinary living entities is that when the living entities are rich in pious acts of devotional service to the Lord, and when their desire to lord it over material nature has vanished, they are promoted to the posts of demigods, who are entrusted by the Lord with executing the management of the universal affairs. So they are all the devotees whose who have enough pious credits, who have a desire to serve the Lord in his Leela. They are given the posts of the demigods. For example, what is the name of the Indra in current Indra in the material world? Does anyone know? His name is Purandar. The Jivatma who is occupying the post of Indradev is Purandar. And like that, so in the next Manvantar, Indradev is going to be Bali Maharaj, which is explained later in the in 8th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, that is elaborated further. So we will come to the verses from Srimad Bhagavad Gita, which are related to this particular as this particular part of the creation and how demigods are taking charge of it. So what Lord says in Bhagavad Gita, let's see. That's obviously in the because we are talking about universal form. So the important chapter for universal form is pretty obvious. That is 8th chapter, which starts with 11th chapter is of course the Lord shows universal form to Arjun, and I think we can go to the last chapter, which is 18th chapter, where there are a lot of conclusions which we will check. So let's go to the 8th chapter, because that is Akshara Brahma Yoga. This particular verse here. Yeah. Sri Bhagwan Uvacha Aksharam Brahma Paramam Swabhavodatmamuchyate Bhuta Bhavod Bhavakaro Visargaha Karma Samhitaha. Translation: Supreme Personality of Godhead said the indestructible, transcendental living entity is called Brahman, and his eternal nature is called Adhyatma, the self. Action pertaining to the development of material bodies of living entities is called karma, or fruitive activities. So, this particular verse, Srila Prabhupada brings the details of the species of life, the Brahma, the indestructible aspect of Brahma, of the eternal existing principle, of Jivatma and all the energies of the Lord and Lord Himself. So I think we can read this purport, which will give us some details of the creation. So, who would like to read these two paragraphs?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, I can read. Can you make it a little bigger, please? Too
Sure,
small.
sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, the purport. Brahman is indestructible and eternally existing, and its constitution is not changed at any time. But beyond Brahman, there is a Para-Brahman. Brahman refers to the living entity, and Para-Brahman refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The constitutional position of the living entity is different from the position he takes in the material world. In material consciousness, his nature is to try to be the Lord of matter. But in spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness, his position is to serve the Supreme. When the living entity is in material consciousness, he has to take on various bodies in the material world. That is called karma, or varied creation by the force of material consciousness. In Vedic literature, the living entity is called Jivatma and Brahman, but he is never called Para-Brahman. The living entity Jivatma takes different positions. Sometimes he merges into the dark material nature and identifies himself with matter, and sometimes he identifies himself with the superior spiritual nature. Therefore, he is called the Supreme Lord's marginal energy. According to his identification with material or spiritual nature, he receives a body, a material or spiritual body. In material nature, he may take a body from any of the 8.4 million species of life. But in spiritual nature, he has only one body. In material nature, he is manifested sometimes as a man, demigod, animal, beast, bird, etc., according to his karma. To attain material heavenly planets and enjoy their facilities, he sometimes performs sacrifice, yagnas, but when his merit is exhausted, he returns to earth again in the form of a man. This process is called karma. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Thank you. So, it gives some insight of what we are discussing in these purports, right? So, let's close this and then we will come to another verse from the 8th chapter. It's like a revision actually, means these verses. Adhibhutam ksharo bhavaha purushashchadidevatam adhiyajño hamevatra dehe dehabhritamvara. Translation: O best of the embodied beings, the physical nature, which is constantly changing, is called Adhibhuta, the material manifestation, the universal form of the Lord, which includes all the demigods, like those of the sun and moon, is called Adhideva. And I, the Supreme Lord, represented as the super soul in the heart of every embodied being, am called Adhyajna, the Lord of Sacrifice. So, again, I think we should read this purport as well, because it is very much related to the verses we are discussing now. And because it is, as Shrivanatam Swakatha Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana, this is told by Maitreya to Mahatma Vidur, but when we can reconcile and when we can go back to the verses from Bhagavad Gita and the purport from Srila Prabhupada, that enriches our understanding of what is explained in Srimad Bhagavatam. So let's read this purport. If we find time, then we will go through some other verses and the purports as well. But let's see. Who would like to read the purport? No one?
I can read Prabhuji if no one is reading.
Yes, of course, please do.
Okay. Purport. Okay, yes. Okay, here. The physical nature is constantly changing. Material bodies generally pass through 6 stages. They are born, they grow, they remain for some duration, they produce some byproducts, they dwindle, and then they vanish. This physical nature is called Adi Bhuta. It is created at a certain point and will be annihilated at a certain point. The conception of universal form of the Supreme Lord, which includes all the demigods and their different planets, is called Adi Daivata. And present in the body along with the individual soul is a super soul, the plenary representation of Lord Krishna. The super soul is called the Paramatma or Adi Yagna and is situated in the heart. The word Eva is particularly important in the context of this verse because by this word the Lord stresses that the Paramatma is not different from him. The super soul and the Supreme Personality of Godhead seated beside the individual soul is a witness of the individual soul's activities and is the source of soul's various types of consciousness. The supersoul gives the individual soul an opportunity to act freely and witnesses his activities. The functions of all the different manifestations of the Supreme Lord automatically become clarified for the pure Krishna conscious devotee engaged in transcendental service to the Lord. The gigantic universal form of the Lord called Adi Daivata is contemplated by the neophyte who cannot approach the Lord. The gigantic universal form of the Lord called Adi Daivata is contemplated by the who cannot approach the Supreme Lord in his manifestation as Super Soul. The neophyte is advised to contemplate the universal form or Virata Rupa, Virata Purusha, whose legs are considered the lower planets, whose eyes are considered the sun and moon, and whose head is considered the upper planetary system. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Mataji. So, again, I think this is the lot nicer way Srila Prabhupada has explained about the planetary systems and who is in charge, what is the creation when Lord is trying to tell Arjun, or Lord is telling Arjun about the demigods and the Parabrahma and the nature of this material world and everything. So, isn't that something amazing? Which is the small purport from Srimad Bhagavatam. If we try to connect with the purports given by Srila Prabhupada in Bhagavad Gita, a lot of things start making sense automatically. Any reflections on this? Yeah. Let me bring some other 3 points. This is chapter 11. So here, again, since we are talking about the demigods, the expansions and all that, so here Arjun is saying, although you are one, you spread throughout the sky and planets and all space between, O great one, seeing the wondrous and terrible form, all the planet systems are perturbed. Here, into text number 21, all the hosts of demigods are surrendering before you and entering into you. So that in 5th chapter, the prayers from the demigods, and how they have clear understanding that the boss, the Supreme Lord, is the one who is controlling everything. And in the 13th chapter, Lord says, Krishna says that Upadrashtanumantacha Bharta Bhokta Maheshwara Paramatma iti chapyukto Dehesmin Purushaha Para. Says that I am the actual enjoyer of every single living body in this material world and in the spiritual world, everywhere. Upadrashta Anumanta. Because he is the one who is actually giving permission of what to do and what not to do. Bharta Bhokta Maheshwara. I am the one who is the enjoyer. He says that. It's actually an expansion of Bhoktaram Yadnyatavasam Sarvaloko Maheshwaram. If we read the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita and go back to especially the 5th and the 6th chapters of Bhagavad Gita and try to reconnect, we can see the reasoning in terms of the Jnana Yoga, how the Karma Yoga is getting expanded further in Jnana Yoga in the 13th chapter, and why that crest jewel of Bhakti Yoga is in the middle. The surrendering, everything, all the facilities given by the Lord, he says, and about Varnashram Dharma and everything else, up to 6th chapter, mind and everything. Why that should be used or understood in the service of the Lord. And that's the beautiful verse from the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Nahi jnanena sadrusham pavitram iha vidyate tatsvayam yoga samsiddha kalenatmani vidyate. Kaletnatmani vindati. What he says in that is the knowledge he's saying, the transcendental knowledge, which is Jnana Yoga, the name of the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. He says that this is the knowledge I am giving to you, Arjuna, O Kaunteya, that this is the supremely pavitra, the divine knowledge I am giving to you, which is basically the knowledge of Bhakti Yoga. Janma karma cha vidyam evam yo vetti tattvataha. He's saying that. And then he says, Vitaraga bhaya krodha. Will come, I don't think we will have enough time to discuss that area in detail. But the point here is the topmost or the crest jewel of all the mysticism is actually this knowledge. Yeah, Lord says in the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Pavitram iha vidyate tatsvayam yoga samsiddha. But what is that yoga? What is that connection to it? Which is, again, if we go back to the Janma Karma Chame Divyam and the later on verses to it, he says, it is to connect to him. Tatsvayam yoga samsiddha. So that you will be perfectly siddha. You will be situated in the right position to of surrendering unto him. And then he's explaining the same thing in the 13th chapter, and obviously in the creation of Sattvara which is the 14th chapter, modes of material nature. And actually, if we go subsequently in the 15th chapter, it is the name itself is a Purushottam yoga of the Supreme, how to connect to him. And we can easily see here that the middle 6 chapters, 7 to 12, as Arjun is saying here, for example, let's this particular the beautiful verse here. O Lord of the Lords, refuge of the worlds, please be gracious upon me. I cannot keep my balance seeing thus your blazing death-like faces and awful teeth in all direction. I am bewildered. Why he says that? Because it's not that he's scared, or he's saying that because it's not that it's a material fear Arjun has. It is the compassion of Arjun. Chila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Chila Baladev Vidyabhushan says in their commentary, Sarartha Varshini Tika of Chila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, that he says Arjun was not scared, or he was, but his compassion, his empathy, that all the living entities, when they are not connected to you, they are going, they're getting destroyed, or they're getting, what do you call, in your Danshtra Karala, that is the actual word. He's saying that they're all material desires, everything is getting crushed in your teeth. And that's what Arjun is not happy about. Um, the devotee, the pure devotee of the Lord, like Srila Prabhupada, what they want is every living entity should be connected. No one should remain orphan. They should understand that the Supreme Lord is our eternal Father, and we should be taking shelter of that. And that's the crux of these verses from the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So I see all people rushing full speed into your mouths as moths dash to destruction in the blazing fire. And towards the end, Arjun says the beautiful verse. It's an amazing verse. Matkarma krunmat paramo madbhakta sangvarjitaha. Not Arjun, the Lord himself is saying this. I'm sorry. Nirvairaha sarvabhuteshu yah samameti mameti pandava. After when Arjun says about the universal form, he said, he describes that, and when he has his eyes are filled with compassion for all the other living entities. Then Lord says, my dear Arjuna, he who engages in pure devotional service, free from the contamination of fruitive activities and mental speculation, he who works for me, who makes me the supreme goal of his life, and who is friendly to every living being, he certainly comes to me. Now look at the beauty of the commentary from our acharyas. They know the mood of Arjun, his compassion, his empathy, why he's saying that I don't want to see this form of yours. Not that, and then Lord is giving this verdict here, my dear Arjun. He who engages in my pure devotional service. Yes, you being not happy seeing this universal form, because Lord is there in the heart, and He says this. What is the objective? What the living entity should be doing, free from the contaminations of fruitive activities and mental speculation. He who works for me, who makes me the supreme goal of his life, and who is friendly to every living thing. So this is what the Arjuna's mood is. He's friendly. He has that mood of Sakhya, not only towards the Lord, towards every living being, every living entity. The friend is always the well-wisher. And that is why Srila Prabhupada used to write in all his letters, you are ever well-wisher, because they are always true friends of everybody. And that's, Srila Prabhupada explains that very beautifully in this fairly long purport, actually. So this is what from Srimad Bhagavad Gita I was thinking of bringing to our notice. And there are 10 verses. I think we have some time. I would like someone to read the translation of the 10 verses from verse number 36 to verse number 46. Who can, and this will be the something wonderful we can conclude from our today's discussion. So who can read this translation of these 10 verses? Because that is actually the reasoning behind the qualities, what we should be doing. It's the advice from the Lord, as he says towards the end of this chapter, 18th chapter, Yatha Ichchasi Tatha Kuru. If you agree, if you understand, if you agree with this, you follow it, it's your free will finally. So who would like to read that? Or shall I read it myself?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Text 36. O best of the Bharatas, now please hear from me about the three kinds of happiness by which the conditioned soul enjoys, and by which he sometime comes to the end of all distress. That which in the beginning may be just like poison, but at the end is just like the nectar, and which awakens one to self-realization, is said to be happiness in the mode of goodness. That happiness which is derived from contact of the senses with their objects, and which appears like nectar at the first, but poison at the end, is said to be of the nature of passion. And that happiness which is blind to self-realization, which is delusion from beginning to end, and which arises from sleep, laziness, and illusion, is said to be of nature of ignorance. There is no being existing, either here or among the demigods in the higher planetary systems, which is freed from these three modes of born of material nature. Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Sudras are distinguished by the qualities born of their own nature in accordance with the material modes or chastiser of the enemy. Peacefulness, self-control, austerity, purity, tolerance, honesty, knowledge, wisdom, and religiousness. These are the natural qualities by which the Brahmanas work. Heroism, power, determination, resourcefulness, courage in battle, generosity, and leadership are natural qualities of work for the Kshatriyas. Farming, cow protection, and business are the natural work for the Vaishyas. And for the Sudras, there are labor and service to others. By following his qualities of work, every man can become perfect. Now please hear from me how this can be done. By worship of the Lord, who is the source of all beings and who is all pervading, a man can attain perfection through performing his own work. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. Yeah. Is that Amok Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhuji. Hare
Oh,
Krishna.
Jai. Thank you. So nice to hear your voice, Prabhuji. Wonderful. So, thank you, Amok Prabhu. So, this is, again, then as per one's occupation and the reasons for the sacrifice, and that will come later on. There is nice, wonderful, elaborate description of details Lord gives here. So that's what those 5 verses we went through, and this is the back and forth. We went to the 5th chapter, the previous chapter in Srimad Bhagavatam, and then we touched upon some of the purports from Bhagavad Gita, and thankfully Indulekha Mataji also brought the reference from the 11th chapter of this canto. So that's where we are now. Amok Prabhu, would you like to add or comments or any reflections, or you have lot more to share actually? So please.
I have been hearing very beautiful Katha, Prabhuji. Very nice to hear for you. So yeah, I'm just relishing hearing.
Oh, thank you, Prabhuji. You're very kind.
Thank you. Hare
Krishna. Are there any questions from anybody? If there are not, then we will stop here. No questions? Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare
Thank
Krishna.
you so much. Thank you so much for this nice class. And as always, you go in deep and look for all the references from Bhagavad Gita, which is very nice, bring the memory back to us. And we see that Arjuna didn't want to see all the people going in the mouth of the Virat Rupa. Similarly, we see at the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, he didn't want to, at the beginning of when the war was about to be, he didn't want to fight because he had compassion against his own kinsmen, his own family members. Then Krishna had to narrate the Bhagavad Gita to him. Here he's showing the Virat Rupa. So that is very, very kind, nice of you to bring all those references from Bhagavad Gita, which make us for sure want to go back and read it again. Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mataji. I think it's because of all of your, even if it is virtual, the presence, I think the Lord in your heart and my heart encourages us to discuss Krishna Katha and go through the verses. Nothing of my credit as such, but thank you very much for the reminder. Hare Krishna. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha
Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna, everyone. Thank you so much, Prabhuji, for the nice class. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji.
Thank you very much. Hare
Krishna.